He wasn't a threat, just a tired father in worn boots holding on to memories that didn't fit into airport bins. That's what the TSA agent muttered as he tossed aside the dog tag like it was trash, ignoring the way the little boy next to him froze. The security line stretched on, the checkpoint scanners blinked indifferently, and no one looked up when the silver coin hit the floor, until someone finally did. And what they saw wasn't just a man stripped of dignity, but a legacy cracked open by arrogance. If you agree that no veteran should ever be shamed in front of their own children, like and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be remembered. It started on a bright Wednesday morning at Terminal 3, the kind of day where the intercom buzzes too often and nobody smiles unless they're leaving something behind. I was 2 rows behind them in the security line, the dad in the olive green jacket, combat boots laced tight, and a soft-worn hat that had seen more sun than most of us see in a lifetime. He had 2 boys with him, maybe 9 and 12, matching backpacks, anxious smiles, and hands holding onto his jacket like it was armor. He smiled at them, the way soldiers do when they've seen too much but refuse to show it. And then TSA Officer Danvers stepped in. Young, lean, and loud in all the wrong ways. He waved them forward and barked, "Hats off, belts off, necklaces off." The dad nodded and did as asked, except for the necklace. It was a single chain with a military tag and a silver coin attached, and he held it in his palm like it was too sacred to set on plastic. Danvers raised an eyebrow. "That comes off too, sir?" And when the dad, his name was Marcus Hale, though we didn't know that yet, quietly explained that he hadn't removed it in decades, not during deployment, not during surgery, not once since 1991, Danvers smirked. "You think that makes you special?" he asked, loud enough for the next 10 people in line to hear. His sons flinched. Marcus didn't answer, just unhooked the chain slowly and placed it in the tray. But Danvers didn't stop. He called over another agent and said, "We've got a non-compliant here." Like Marcus was a threat, not a father trying to get through a line with his dignity intact. They made him step aside, unlaced his boots, patted him down in front of everyone. His kids watched the whole thing in silence, until the younger one whispered, "Did Dad do something wrong?" That's when I noticed the coin on the floor, silver, worn, with an emblem I hadn't seen in years. A challenge coin. A real one. And the only reason it was there is because an agent had knocked the tray off the table mid-search. Marcus bent down to pick it up, but Danvers kicked it closer to the trash bin without even noticing. It rolled to a stop near my foot. I picked it up, hand shaking, and looked at the etching. 3rd Battalion, Mosul. My brother had served there. Died there. And in that moment, the humiliation became unbearable, not just for Marcus, but for everyone watching. A woman across the rope line started filming. A man in a wheelchair whispered, "That's Captain Hale. He saved an entire squad in '05. You could feel the shift in the room, like air being sucked out of the terminal. A line that had once been a blur of bags and belts had become a congregation of stillness. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Just silence, stretched taut by disbelief. And then, as if on cue, the older son tugged at his father's sleeve and asked, "Can we go home now?" Marcus knelt beside him, placed the coin in the boy's hand, and whispered something none of us could hear, but I didn't need to. Because it wasn't just a necklace or a coin. It was a life. A sacrifice. A name that carried weight far beyond a checkpoint. Danvers didn't care. "Move it along," he barked. "You're holding up the line." But by then, it wasn't a line anymore. It was a witness stand. And he was being watched by a crowd that finally understood. Not because Marcus had raised his voice. Not because he fought back. But because he didn't. Because in a place where everyone was told to move, he stood still. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was quiet. Casual. Dismissive. And that's what made it worse. Worse than anger. Worse than violence. It was the ease with which they stripped him down in front of his boys. Like the coin meant nothing. Like the tag was just metal. But some of us knew better. Some of us still remembered what that tag meant. And what followed next, the protests, the confrontation, the man in uniform who came running from another terminal. None of that would have happened if Marcus hadn't stood there silently, his boots off, his honor intact, and his sons watching everything. At first, It was just one voice, a woman in a Navy business suit near the gate who had stopped mid-step, her phone still recording, her voice clear but shaking with disbelief as she said, "This is wrong. He didn't deserve that." And something in that one sentence cracked the air open. Because in a terminal built for movement, for shuffle and silence and going about your own business, people suddenly began to stop. A mother with a stroller turned around. A businessman lowered his tablet. And then someone else said it louder. "He's a veteran, for God's sake." The energy shifted, slow but unstoppable, like water through broken concrete. And right there, in the middle of TSA's sacred space, where people usually whisper, keep their heads down, and never argue, the line simply stopped. Marcus Hale stood motionless, still in socks, his boots off to the side, his youngest boy still clutching the coin like it was a piece of his father's heart. Officer Danvers told him to keep moving, but no one moved. Not Marcus. Not his kids. Not the people behind them. And that was when the flood began. A man in a bomber jacket stepped under the rope barrier and said, "Sir, thank you for your service." And he wasn't the last. A woman with a lanyard and federal badge stepped out of line and said, "I served under Hale and Ramadi." And still TSA tried to regain control, radios crackling, voices rising, but the crowd wasn't interested in authority anymore. They were interested in justice, in dignity, in the moment they had all just witnessed, a father stripped of respect in front of his sons because a badge thought silence meant weakness. Near the information kiosk, a young officer named Mendez, no more than 24, dropped his clipboard and sprinted toward the checkpoint. We didn't know who he was then, just that he ran like someone chasing a ghost. He didn't stop until he reached the barrier, saluted sharply, and shouted, "Captain Hale." Marcus turned slowly, confused, but Mendez's voice didn't falter. "Sir, you saved my father's life in Kandahar. I've seen your face in our home since I was 5 years old." His words fell like thunder, and silence followed. Danvers tried to laugh it off, but no one was laughing. The woman recording everything stepped forward again and announced she had posted the clip on social media 10 minutes ago, and it already had over 80,000 views. The phrase #honor the captain had begun trending across the country before Marcus even tied his boots again. And that's when airport security tried damage control. The checkpoint manager, a grizzled man named Stevens, came down from the mezzanine level, his earpiece buzzing, his posture tight. "We'd like to escort you through privately," he told Marcus. But it was too late for closed doors and quiet fixes. The passengers who had been told to wait now refused to board. A nearby gate delayed its flight because a group of Marines on leave had heard what was happening and joined the crowd. They stood in uniform behind Marcus's kids like a living honor guard. One of them knelt down and said, "You know your dad is a hero, right?" The younger son nodded, eyes wide, still holding the coin. "He never told us," he said. "He just said he did a job." The Marine smiled, eyes glassy. "He didn't just do a job, kid. He saved a lot of men." TSA tried to redirect the crowd. They asked people to disperse. They threatened delays. But no one moved. Because this wasn't about a delay anymore. This was about what happens when silence is finally answered by truth. And the truth was standing barefoot, head high, next to two boys who had just seen their father treated like a criminal for refusing to let go of a memory too sacred to explain. That's when the news cameras arrived. Not because anyone called them, but because the clip had gone viral. A local reporter shoved a mic through the crowd and asked Marcus what he wanted to say. He didn't speak right away. Just looked around, at the crowd, at the signs now being written on napkins and boarding passes, at the sea of strangers who had refused to let humiliation win. And then he said one sentence, "I didn't serve so I could be worshipped. I served so no one else had to be humiliated like this." You could have heard a pin drop. And then someone in the back shouted, "He's earned his gate." Applause rose, loud and raw. Not manufactured. Not polite. Real. A wave of sound that shook the windows. And Marcus, humble as always, just nodded once and reached for his boots. A child behind me whispered, "He's like one of those old movie soldiers." And for the first time in an hour, Marcus Hale smiled. Not for the cameras. Not for the crowd. But because he saw that maybe his boys wouldn't remember the pat down, or the tray, or the insult. They'd remember this. The crowd, the salute, the way the terminal came to a standstill not because of chaos, but because of respect finally waking up. It wasn't supposed to go this far. That's what the airport director said when she arrived 10 minutes later, flanked by Homeland Security officials and two terminal supervisors who looked like they'd just been dragged from a meeting they couldn't afford to miss. But by then, it was already too late. The crowd wasn't just a group of onlookers anymore. It had become something else, something bigger, a reckoning. Travelers filled every inch of Terminal 3's concourse, not in panic or protest, but in reverent silence, their eyes fixed on the man at the center of it all. Marcus Hale, now fully dressed again, boots tied, cap on, his boy standing quietly beside him. No one needed a microphone to know that this moment mattered. The director approached with forced calm, her blazer too perfect, her smile too late. She apologized profusely, on behalf of the airport, on behalf of TSA, on behalf of anyone who had the power to stop what had happened but didn't. "We'd like to offer you a private escort, sir. Full security detail, VIP access, anything you need." Marcus looked at her with a quiet that held more strength than any uniform in the building. "I don't want VIP access," he said. "I want them to see it." He gestured to his sons. "I want them to remember that you don't walk away from humiliation. You stand in it and wait for the world to catch up." Behind him, the Marine Guard still stood tall, unmoving. A woman stepped forward from the crowd then, a flight attendant, mid-40s, her voice cracking as she introduced herself. "Captain Hale, I think you flew with my brother out of Kabul. He used to write home about you. Called you the calm in the storm." Marcus blinked slowly, his jaw tightening just enough to betray the emotion rising beneath the surface. He didn't remember every name, but he remembered the mission, and the silence that followed was sacred. The crowd parted as they led him and his boys toward Gate 14. Not a soul moved ahead of him. Phones filmed silently, heads bowed. Even children seemed to understand this was not a man you hurried past. And just before they reached the jet bridge, the intercom clicked. A soft chime, followed by the voice of the flight captain himself. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin boarding, we'd like to take a moment to recognize Captain Marcus Hale. Today, we honor not just his service, but his silence, the kind that speaks louder than orders, louder than medals, louder than apologies offered too late." Every speaker in the terminal echoed with those words. At that moment, Marcus paused, removed his cap, and turned back to face the crowd. His older son took his hand, and his voice, steady, weathered, carried like a ripple across still water. "I didn't come here to be noticed," he said. "I came to get my kids to their grandmother. That's it. But if this helped remind anyone that respect isn't earned in a spotlight, but in silence, then maybe today mattered." He placed the cap gently on his younger son's head and nodded toward the plane. The boy beamed like he'd just been handed the keys to the moon. The Marine Honor Guard saluted. The TSA supervisor who had watched the whole scene unfold from behind thick glass came forward, removed his badge quietly, and placed it on the table by the checkpoint with a single word: "Ashamed." No one stopped him. No one had to. Danvers had already been escorted away hours earlier, the moment a Pentagon official called the airport directly, demanding to know why one of their retired captains had been publicly humiliated and denied respect. The official didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "You had your chance to act like Americans. Now we will." Before Marcus boarded, the airport director handed him a small black box, newly printed, still warm. Inside was a laminated ID card, permanent access clearance, with a red seal pressed into the corner. "It's not much," she said, "but it's our way of saying this will never happen again. To anyone." Marcus looked down at the card, then back at the crowd. "It will happen again," he said, not cruelly, but with certainty. "Just not here." And with that, he boarded the plane. Not as a hero, not as a victim, but as a father who had refused to let his silence be mistaken for surrender. The plane door closed. The crowd slowly broke. People returned to their gates, their phones, their ordinary lives. But something had shifted. In every pocket of Terminal 3, stories were already being told, to children, to strangers, to flight crews and agents. Stories about a man who didn't need to raise his voice to raise a standard. Stories about what dignity looks like when it's threatened, and what it becomes when it's defended not with anger, but with grace. Weeks later, a bronze plaque was mounted just outside the security checkpoint. No ribbon cutting, no ceremony, just a quiet engraving above a seating area where travelers now paused without knowing why. It read, "For the veteran who was asked to remove his honor," and chose to stand instead. Beneath it, no name, just a quote carved deep into the metal. "Real strength speaks when others go quiet." And on a quiet Sunday morning, two boys returned with their grandmother and sat under that plaque, sharing a small coin between them, the kind that doesn't shine but never fades.